The bag broke on the third step, right where the stairwell light had been flickering for 2 weeks because the landlord kept meaning to fix it, and that was how I ended up on my knees in a hallway that smelled like somebody's dinner, chasing 3 oranges and a rolling can of chickpeas while my neighbor stood above me laughing so hard she had to grip the railing. I'm Noah Bennett, 30, an HVAC technician who spent most of his days climbing into other people's attics and most of his evenings avoiding his own apartment because it was too quiet since my divorce finalized 8 months earlier. My neighbor was Ruby Ashford, 28, who ran the tiny bakery 2 blocks from our building, and who I had exchanged maybe 11 words with in the 6 months since she moved into 4B. Good morning. Nice weather. Sorry about the noise. That kind of thing. The polite currency of people who live 12 feet apart and know almost nothing about each other. That Thursday in October, I came home from a job replacing a furnace igniter to find her wrestling for overloaded grocery bags out of her car. The kind of overloaded that meant she'd made 1 trip instead of 2 because she was too stubborn to walk back to the trunk twice. I watched her get exactly 1.5 flights up before the bag with the produce gave out completely. Let me guess, I said, crouching to grab the oranges before they made it all the way down to the lobby. This is going great. Phenomenal, she said. Really thriving. This is peak grocery transportation. I gathered what I could, and we ended up doing an awkward relay up 3 flights, me carrying the 2 bags that had survived and 1 orange balanced on top like a garnish, her carrying what remained of the produce in her arms like a very disorganized harvest festival. By the time we reached her door, we were both laughing, which was the first time I'd laughed in front of another person in longer than I wanted to admit. Thank you, she said, unlocking her door with her elbow because her hands were full. Seriously, I was about to just leave the flour on the stairs and call it a loss. Anytime, I said, and meant it more than the phrase usually implies. She looked at me for a second, the kind of look that assesses something and finds it worth a second thought. Do you like sugar? Excuse me? Sugar. Baked goods. Butter and flour combined through a process older than civilization. I have never once in my life said no to that question. Good, she said. Because I owe you and I don't do cash, I do carbs. She disappeared into her kitchen and came back 2 minutes later with a small paper bag, still warm, that turned out to contain the best cinnamon roll I had eaten since I was a kid at my grandmother's kitchen table. I told her that. She looked unreasonably pleased about it for someone who apparently made things like this every single day for a living. That should have been the whole story. A broken grocery bag, a cinnamon roll, a polite thank you, and back to our respective lives 12 feet apart. Instead, 3 days later, she knocked on my door at 7:40 in the evening, holding her phone like it had personally wronged her. I need a favor, she said, and I need you to say yes before you know what it is because if I explain it first, you'll say no, and I don't have anyone else. That is an aggressive negotiating strategy. It's the only one I've got left. I'm out of other people. I leaned against my doorframe. What's the favor? See, this is the part where you were supposed to already say yes. I'm a cautious man, Ruby. I check the weather before I leave the house. She exhaled, the kind of exhale that comes before someone says something they've been avoiding saying out loud. There's a baking competition. The Fall Harvest Pears Bake Off. It's a big deal downtown. It's televised on the local news. My bakery's entire marketing plan for the next year was built around me placing in the top 3. I signed up months ago with a partner. He dropped out yesterday. Who was the partner? She hesitated exactly long enough for me to understand the answer before she gave it. My ex-fiancé. I straightened up slightly. That seems like an unusual choice of baking partner. We got engaged, we planned this competition together back when we were still together. We broke up 4 months ago, and out of some deeply questionable optimism I decided we could still do the competition as friends because we'd already put down the deposit and I am, historically, bad at cutting my losses. She rubbed her forehead. He texted me yesterday to say he's bringing his new girlfriend to watch, which I could have handled, And then this morning he texted again to say he's actually dropping out of the competition entirely because it's, quote, weird now. Which leaves me with a registration in 2 names, an event in 6 days, and a mixing bowl full of recipes designed for 2 people. And you need a second person. I need a second person who can follow instructions, doesn't panic under a countdown clock, and isn't going to make it weird if my ex shows up to watch me fail publicly. That's a very specific set of requirements. You carried my groceries without complaining, and you didn't flinch when I told you my life was falling apart over cinnamon rolls. That's the highest bar anyone's cleared in months. I should have said I had no idea what I was doing. I should have pointed out that my culinary skill set began and ended with furnace repair and reheating leftovers. Instead, I found myself looking at a woman standing in my doorway holding her phone like a shield, trying to look like this was a business proposition and not something that scared her, and I said the only thing that made any sense to me in that moment. Okay, teach me to bake. Her whole face changed, relief landing on it so visibly it was almost funny. You're serious? I fix furnaces for a living, Ruby. I can follow a recipe. Possibly. Possibly is not the confidence level I was hoping for. It's the confidence level I have available. I'll take it, she said. Practice starts tomorrow. 7 a.m. My kitchen. Wear something you don't mind getting flour on because you will get flour on it. There is no version of this where you don't get flour on it. Understood. Also, she added, already halfway back to her own door, thank you. Genuinely. I know this is insane. I have conditions, I said, because apparently that had become my pattern with impulsive agreements to strangers' family chaos. She turned back. Of course you do. 1, you can't yell at me when I mess up the lamination or whatever it's called. Lamination is pastry. We're doing pies. But fine, granted. 2, if your ex says something ridiculous at this competition, I get to make 1 comment back. Just 1. She considered this with the seriousness of a treaty negotiation. 1 comment. Approved. 3. I paused, and this one came out more honest than I intended. If it gets to be too much, we stop. No explanations required. Something in her expression softened in a way that had nothing to do with pastry. Okay, she said quietly. Deal. The next morning at 7, I stood in Ruby's kitchen in a borrowed apron that said "Kiss the Baker" in cursive, which she'd handed me without comment, and which I chose not to acknowledge either. And I learned that baking under her instruction was less like following a recipe and more like being handed a live grenade with a smile. You're overworking the dough, she said, watching me knead like I was trying to punish it for something. I'm being thorough. You're being violent. Pie crust wants a light touch. Think of it like it's had a long day and just wants to be left alone. I don't know how to be gentle with baked goods. Ruby. I install furnaces. My whole professional skill set is torque. Well, unlearn torque for the next 5 days or we're going to serve the judges something you could use as a roof shingle. We practiced every morning before work and most evenings after. I learned that she talked with her hands when she was nervous, that she hummed under her breath when a recipe was going right, that she had a specific face she made when she tasted something and knew instantly it needed more salt. I learned that her bakery had been her grandmother's dream before it was hers, that she'd taken it over 3 years ago when her grandmother's hands got too unsteady for the fine work, and that every recipe in her repertoire had a story attached to it that she'd tell if you let a silence sit long enough. I also learned, somewhere around the 3rd morning, elbow deep in apple filling with cinnamon dust on both our hands, that I had started looking forward to 7 a.m. in a way that had nothing to do with pie. You're getting better, she said on day 4, watching me crimp a crust edge with something almost approaching competence. High praise. I don't hand it out casually. I've noticed. You've called my crimping not actively bad twice this week, and I've chosen to take that as a compliment. It is a compliment. In my kitchen, not actively bad is basically a trophy. She wiped flour off her cheek with the back of her wrist, leaving another streak in its place, and looked at me with an expression I was starting to recognize and starting to be a little frightened by. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why did you actually say yes? You didn't know me. You still barely know me. I basically ambushed you in a hallway." I thought about lying, about saying something easy about neighborly kindness or free pastry. Instead, I told her the truth, because something about her kitchen at 7 in the morning made truth feel like the only currency that made sense there. "Because you looked like someone trying really hard not to ask for help," I said. "And I've spent the last 8 months being someone who really needed help and didn't ask for it either. Seemed like a shame for both of us to keep doing that." She was quiet for a second, flour still on her cheek, wooden spoon still in her hand. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me since October. It's been a rough October." "It has," she agreed. "It's getting less rough, though." Neither of us said anything else about it. We went back to the pie. The morning of the competition, Ruby showed up at my door at 6 a.m. wearing an apron over actual clothes for once instead of pajamas. Hair pulled back, nervous energy radiating off her like heat off a stove. "Okay," she said. "I need you to understand something before we go." "What's that?" "Derek is going to be there, watching, with Chelsea." Chelsea being the new girlfriend. Chelsea being the new girlfriend, who I'm told owns a yoga studio and posts inspirational quotes with sunset photos, and who I have never met and already have complicated feelings about, none of which are her fault, all of which I'm working on. Understood. He's going to make some kind of comment. I know him. He can't help it. He gets uncomfortable and he deflects with jokes that aren't actually jokes. "You told me I get one comment back." "I remember the terms of our agreement, yes." "Good," I said. "Then let's go make a pie that ruins his whole week." That got the first real laugh out of her all morning, the kind that came from somewhere lower than her throat, and something in my chest settled at the sound of it in a way I didn't examine too closely at 6 in the morning with a car to catch. The competition was held in a converted warehouse downtown. 12 stations arranged in a horseshoe under bright television lighting. A local news crew setting up near the judge's table, and enough nervous energy in the room to power the whole block. Ruby's station was Station 7. Derek's replacement plan, apparently, had been to simply not show up and let the chips fall. So when we arrived, Station 8 sat empty except for a name card that said Derek Voss Partner, which somebody clearly hadn't updated. We didn't have to wonder long about whether he'd come to watch. He showed up 20 minutes before the timer started, holding 2 coffees, one of which was clearly for the woman beside him. A tall blonde and athletic who introduced herself to absolutely nobody and simply stood near the ropes looking politely uncomfortable, which made me like her more than I expected to. Derek caught sight of Ruby's station, then me standing at it in a borrowed apron with flour already dusted on my forearms from prep, and his expression did something complicated. "Ruby," he said, walking over with the easy confidence of a man who'd never once considered that a room might not be arranged around him. "You actually found someone." "I actually found someone," she said, not looking up from arranging her mise en place. His eyes moved to me. "The HVAC guy from your building." "Wow. Didn't expect that." "Didn't ask you to," Ruby said mildly, still arranging. "No offense," Derek said, in the specific tone of a man who was about to say something offensive. "It's just, this competition's pretty technical. Lamination, temperature control, timing. Not exactly furnace repair." I felt Ruby go very still beside me. I remembered the terms of our agreement, one comment, and I decided this was the moment to spend it. "Funny thing about furnace repair," I said, keeping my voice level and pleasant. "It's mostly precision under time pressure with a strict tolerance for error, which turns out to transfer pretty well to baking. Also, I've spent 5 straight mornings at 6 a.m. learning from someone who actually knows what she's doing, which is more than I can say for whatever preparation got you a spot at this competition in the first place." Derek's easy smile flickered. Chelsea, standing a few feet back, made a small sound that might have been a laugh she tried to swallow. I was just being honest, Derek said. So was I said. Good luck with your coffee. He left. Ruby exhaled slowly, a laugh trapped somewhere in the exhale trying to get out. You used your one comment. I did. It was a good one. I workshopped it in the car. I could tell. It had structure. She looked at me, something warmer in her expression than the competition alone could explain. Thank you. Anytime, I said. And this time I meant it the way I'd meant it in the stairwell, except heavier now, except with 6 mornings of shared flour and shared jokes and shared silence behind it. The timer started. 3 hours, 1 apple pie built from Ruby's grandmother's recipe, adjusted slightly, she told me, because her grandmother always said a recipe should bend a little for whoever's making it. I peeled and cored while she built the filling. She rolled the bottom crust while I watched her hands with the kind of attention I usually reserved for wiring diagrams. We worked in a rhythm that felt less like 6 days of practice and more like something we'd been doing for years, passing tools without asking, anticipating each other's next move, occasionally bumping shoulders at the counter and neither of us moving away from it as quickly as we probably should have. Halfway through, with the pie in the oven and 20 minutes to watch the clock, Ruby leaned against the counter beside me, exhaustion and adrenaline both visible on her face. Can I tell you something weird? She said. You've been telling me weird things all week. I've built up a tolerance. I'm not actually thinking about the competition right now. What are you thinking about? She looked at the oven, then at me, then back at the oven, like the timer might rescue her from finishing the sentence. I'm thinking about how I haven't dreaded a single morning this week. Not one. For 4 months, every morning felt like something to get through. This week it felt like something to get to. She laughed a little, embarrassed. That's probably the sleep deprivation talking. It's probably not, I said, quieter than I meant to. She looked at me properly then. Timer forgotten, oven forgotten. The noise of the competition around us fading into something distant and unimportant. Noah, she said. Yeah. If we don't place in the top 3 today, I want you to know I don't actually care. That seems like a bold statement for someone who built her whole marketing plan around this. The marketing plan can survive one disappointing bake-off. She looked down at her hands, flour still under her nails despite the washing. I care about the mornings. The rest of this, honestly, feels like a very elaborate excuse. An excuse for what? For this? She said, and gestured between us. A small motion that somehow contained 6 days and 1 broken grocery bag and a cinnamon roll and every silence we'd let sit a little too long. I don't know what this is yet, but I know it's not just pie. I should have said something smooth. I'd had 4 months to get out of practice at saying the right thing at the right moment, and it showed because what came out instead was simple and unpolished and entirely true. It's not just pie for me either, I said. It hasn't been since the 2nd morning, when you yelled at me about torque. She laughed, real and full. The sound I'd been chasing without admitting it since day 1. I did yell about torque. You did. It was surprisingly attractive. That is deeply concerning information about your standards. My standards have improved considerably this week. The oven timer went off. We both jumped, the moment breaking apart the way moments do when reality insists on continuing, and we spent the next 10 minutes cooling the pie and dressing the plate for presentation. Both of us a little too aware of the other's hands, both of us not quite looking at each other and both of us absolutely aware of not looking. The judges came around. They tasted. One of them, an older woman with silver hair and the calm authority of someone who had judged 100 of these competitions, took a second bite before saying anything, which Ruby told me later was either very good or very bad, and there was no way to know which until she spoke. This crust, the judge said slowly, has an unusual structural confidence for a first-time competitor pairing. My partner has a background in precision work, Ruby said, not looking at me, clearly trying not to smile. It shows, the judge said, and moved on. We didn't win first place. We took second. beaten by a pair of sisters who'd been competing together for 6 years, and had a passion fruit curd that the judges genuinely could not stop talking about. But second place, on a team built in 6 days by a baker and a furnace technician, was enough to make the local news segment, enough to have Ruby's bakery name mentioned on air, and enough to make Derek, watching from the ropes with Chelsea, offer Ruby a stiff congratulations that she accepted with far more grace than I would have managed. "You did great," Chelsea told her, unprompted, genuine in a way that made the whole moment less awkward than it had any right to be. "That pie looked incredible." "Thank you," Ruby said, genuinely. Derek shifted, uncomfortable, and looked at me. "Second place. Not bad for an HVAC guy. Not bad for a guy who dropped out and let his ex figure it out alone," I said, mild as anything, and this time I hadn't planned it, hadn't workshopped it in the car, it just came out because it needed to. Derek didn't have a response for that one. Chelsea, beside him, looked briefly and unmistakably impressed, in a way I suspected would follow Derek home in the car. They left. Ruby and I stood at our station, pie plate empty, second place ribbon sitting between us on the counter, the warehouse slowly emptying around us. "We should go home," Ruby said. "It's been a very long week." "We should," I agreed, and neither of us moved. "Noah." "Yeah." I meant what I said in there. About the mornings. "I know. I meant it too." She reached over and picked up the ribbon, turning it over in her hands like it was something more significant than a piece of satin with second place stamped on it. And then she looked at me with an expression that had nothing careful left in it. "I'd like to keep having mornings like this," she said. "Not competition mornings, necessarily. Just mornings. With you. In my kitchen or yours or wherever, I'm not particular about the location." "I'd like that too," I said. "I'd like that a lot, actually." "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." She smiled, the full unguarded version I'd seen exactly twice before, once over a perfectly browned crust and once at Derek's expense, and this time it was aimed entirely at me. "Good," she said, "because I already told my grandmother about you. She wants to meet the man who fixed my grocery bag and my baking partner situation in the same month." "Your grandmother knows about me?" "My grandmother knows everything." The slightly alarming. "Is she going to interrogate me?" "Extensively. She has opinions about men who don't call when they say they will and men who let a woman carry 4 grocery bags alone up 3 flights of stairs. I carried 3 of the 4 bags. I told her that part. It's why you're getting an interview instead of an immediate rejection." I laughed and she stepped closer, close enough that the warehouse noise and the departing competitors and the whole strange, flour-dusted week collapsed down into just the 2 feet of space between us. "For what it's worth," I said, "I think this might be the best furnace repair job I've ever taken." "That's a very strange thing to call this. I'm working with the professional vocabulary I have available. Your professional vocabulary needs some romance training. I'm told my baking has improved considerably in 6 days. I'm optimistic about my prospects." She laughed and closed the last of the distance between us, and I kissed her right there next to a cooling pie plate and a second-place ribbon, under warehouse lights and the last of the departing news crew, and it tasted faintly like cinnamon and apple filling and like something I hadn't let myself want in 8 months. When we pulled back, she rested her forehead against my shoulder for a second, the way you do when something has finally settled into place. "This was supposed to be about pie," she said. "It was never about pie," I said. "I don't even really like pie that much." She pulled back, mock offended. "You ate 3 slices during practice on Tuesday." "I was building rapport with the recipe." "You were flirting with a pastry." "I was flirting with the baker. The pastry was incidental." She grinned and took my hand, flour still faintly on both our palms, and we walked out of the warehouse together into the cold November afternoon, ribbon in her other hand, the whole rest of the day suddenly wide open in a way neither of us had expected 6 days earlier when a grocery bag broke on a stairwell step. We met her grandmother the following Sunday. Eleanor Ashford turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman of 81, who ran her granddaughter's kitchen from memory even though her hands had retired from the fine work years earlier, and she looked me over for a full uncomfortable minute before asking her first question. "You carried her groceries," she said. It wasn't a question exactly. It was a verification. 3 of the 4 bags, I said. The 4th one broke before I got there. And you learned to bake in 6 days. I learned to not actively ruin pie crust in 6 days. Ruby's the one who taught me. Eleanor looked at her granddaughter, then back at me, something in her expression shifting from assessment to something warmer. "He's honest," she told Ruby. "That's rarer than it should be." I noticed, Ruby said, looking at me in a way that made the whole kitchen feel warmer than the oven alone could explain. That was 4 months ago. These days I still fix furnaces and Ruby still runs the bakery, and most mornings before either of us goes to work, I'm in her kitchen at 6 a.m. Not because there's a competition anymore, but because it's become the best part of the day. Flour on my forearms, her humming under her breath when a recipe's going right. The 2 of us working in a rhythm we built out of a broken grocery bag and a bad breakup and a bet neither of us regrets making. Derek and Chelsea are, according to the neighborhood grapevine, still together, and apparently doing well, which Ruby says she's genuinely glad about now that enough time has passed for gladness to feel real instead of performed. The Fall Harvest Bake-Off invited us back for next year's competition, and Ruby's already drafting a recipe that she swears will beat the Passion Fruit Curd sisters, and I've already agreed to be her partner again. No negotiation required this time, no conditions attached, because some things you don't need conditions for anymore once you know what they're worth. Last week, she handed me a spare key to 4B without any ceremony at all, just set it on the counter next to my coffee like it was the most obvious thing in the world, and said, "In case the bakery runs long and you get home first." I looked at the key for a second, then at her, standing there in a flour-dusted apron in the kitchen where all of this started. That's a big step for a guy who broke your grocery bag. You didn't break the bag. The bag broke itself. You just showed up for the aftermath. She smiled, the full unguarded one. That's kind of become your whole thing, though. Showing up for the aftermath. I've decided I'd like you showing up for a lot more of it. I took the key. I still have it. It sits on my keyring next to the one for my own apartment, and some mornings I genuinely can't remember which door I meant to unlock first, which feels like exactly the kind of problem I don't mind having anymore. What would you have done if you helped your neighbor carry her groceries and she asked you to be her partner in a competition against her ex? Have you ever said yes to something impulsive that turned out to change your whole life? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.